Hey everyone, Sycra here, and today I'm going to be doing a critique of one of the forum members over at the Sycra.net forums. Alright, so here we have a portrait, and it's pretty well done. I think you did a lot of things really well, and so here's a reference, and here's my my paint over here. I got a bit carried away because I just had my headphones on and I was painting, and then I just sort of kept painting. But anyway, so what I feel is that you're doing some things really well. For instance, you've blocked in the shadow shape on the side of her face, and that's really clear, and that's great. But you need to take it a bit further, and you need to be thinking about value shapes a lot more than you currently are. So what I mean by that is, for instance, you've got like this split, right? That's fine. But when I squint my eyes, and this is what you got to be doing, and I've made a video on how painters use squinting. You might want to check that out. If you're not using squinting, you should be when you're doing things like this. But when I squint my eyes and I look at the reference here, this, the shape I see is sort of like this. The value shape. And then I just see a bit of that cheek, but that's really the shape that I'm seeing. And if I squint down, something like that. So when I squint at yours, though, the eye sort of pops out too much, and this seems a bit too light. So it's something to keep in mind, that you want to be thinking about these big value shapes. And it would help to actually block that in right from the beginning. So what I did in the paint over, and you'll see the process, I'll put that right after this, is I really wanted to focus on simplifying it. Use big brushes and first block in your big shapes and then break things down. And then the other thing is the likeness is close. There's some issues, but most of the issues I feel are coming from not necessarily you getting the drawing wrong, because the drawing's pretty close and it's quite good. It's the values. I feel like your face is overall far too light in the light side. Now it's nice to contrast that light against dark, and also your colors are a bit different. So when I did this one, I sort of went in between the two. I noticed this one, the colors are a bit more purple and red and pink and things, and yours are more warm yellows. Of course, you've changed the color of the shirt and the pattern. That's fine, and you changed the background, so that's gonna influence things as well. So I sort of went in between that, and I kept things a bit more towards yellows. So for instance, here I see things are a bit more red, and then I tried to make it a bit more yellow like yours. But anyway, the main thing is, yeah, the values, and things like value transitions. So pay special attention to things like the cheek, right? So when I look at the cheek, what I see is you get a dark area, right? And then it gets lighter, and then lighter as it goes towards this. And what that does is it creates this form, right? Whereas in yours, you've got this dark area, which is sort of, you know, it's not fully dark, but then you'll notice there's like an area here. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of hard to see, but it's an interruption in value. And then so it gets like dark, and then it gets a bit lighter, and then it gets a bit darker, and then it gets light. You don't want to do that. You want the smooth transition. You want it to go like in my overpaint, it goes dark, and then it just gets lighter and lighter. So you feel that form. You've got more of an understanding. Remember, this is really important, but anytime you have a value change, unless it's a local color issue, it's going to signify a form change. So if you don't include certain value transitions, it's not going to look right. And for instance, like even here, let's say the bottom part of this cheek, it's a little bit darker than this part. And what that's saying is that the form goes like this way, and then it comes down, and then it goes that way, right? So all those things come across with subtle value transitions. So now let's go and watch the process. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is get the light side to be the right value. So as I mentioned before, your right side was a bit too light in value. So I'm trying to get the values right, and it's going to look pretty terrible for a while. But what I'm doing is I'm just simplifying all the values, separating the light from the dark and getting the values working. So in order to do that, I just don't worry about details. So even the eye, for instance, is a detail. And I'm constantly squinting my eyes. This is so important to squint. And I'm doing this throughout the whole thing. I'm just squinting and looking at the shapes I see. And a shape that I felt was missing in yours was actually in her left eye, our screen right eye, where if you squint down, then from the eyebrow to the lower eyelid, there's like a, I don't know how you would say it, but like a dark shape. And yours didn't really have that too much, but it's definitely there in the reference. And you've got to remember that the eyeball is a ball, so that means that it's not just a flat circle. There is a light side and a shadow side to it. Alright, so yeah, as I mentioned before, I'm still doing the same thing. I'm just blocking in the big shapes. You have to not worry about details at all, and maybe it's not going to look nice for a while. And sometimes when I'm drawing and then or painting and someone comes to look at it while I'm in the middle of it, it's all messy, but it's important that they understand, well, that's just part of the process. So yeah, I'm not thinking about the highlights either. I'm focusing mainly on the broad midtones. So that means that in the shadows, it could go darker, and in the light side, it could go lighter, but I'm not worried about that just yet. So I'm thinking also about color, and you've got this in your picture too, which is great, that it sort of warms up as it turns into the shadow. You'll see this especially in the reference on the nose, on the neck, in the transition between light and shadow, and even that highlight on the opposite side of the face, on her right side of the face, that little triangle on the cheek gets warmed up. So there's a lot of that going on. And those are going to be in the places where there's like blood. If you notice on the forehead, it gets a bit cool, and that's because of the bone. It's going to cool it down. You're also going to get some light from whatever is on the top, so some atmospheric light. So yeah. And see, I'm also softening edges. I'm not keeping edges really sharp. The way you have it is, it's quite sharp. I don't know exactly what your process was. It almost feels like you used either a lasso or a pencil or something very hard to block out the outline, and then you maybe went in with a softer brush for some internal form changes. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, I like to have the freedom to blend some of the edges, make them some soft edges, maybe even lost edges, like you can see on the her right side shoulder sort of gets all fuzzy, so it can blend into the background. And I might have pushed it a bit too much, or actually it's more a case of I didn't spend enough time on this. I think in total it was an hour and 17 minutes for this. So anyway, so now that I've got the big shapes, now it's okay. Now I can block in those darker forms, and you'll notice that I'm blocking in shapes, right? just value shapes. It's not like I'm drawing an eye. I'm just drawing dark values, and then at the end it just so happens to look like an eye if you do it right. And I zoomed in just because I need to do that for the eye. It's important. In a portrait, the eyes are really, usually anyway, the most important thing. So, and if I was doing this, as a finished piece, what I would do is I'd zoom in much further, and I'd also zoom in when I'm doing the mouth to make sure that's really accurate. And now keeping the hair soft is another important thing, because hair is soft. The way you have it it's very hard-edged, and you're losing some of the feeling of that hair. Hair is great because you can just be more loose with it. You can get the likeness and really focus on getting the proportions in the face, getting the lighting and everything right in the face, but then you can be a bit more free with the hair and be more conscious of your brush strokes. Let them, or I don't know, just let them go wild. Something else you want to pay attention to is the eyebrows. Notice how in mine, and I probably pushed it to the opposite extreme, but I kept the eyebrow in the light side very light. When you squint down, you'll notice that eyebrows are not that far, especially in this face. They're not that far away from the skin tone in the light. And in yours, there's much more of a, almost like it's drawn in, the eyebrow. So you want to look out for that. Skin has so many soft, subtle transitions. The values, that you don't have huge jumps really. So that's important to keep in mind. Now I'm just darkening the area in the background simply because I want it to have more contrast. If you have a dark beside a light, that's going to make it pop forward more. And now I'm worrying about the highlights. So finally I'm getting most of my values down. So now it's just doing the minor finishing touches. And I don't know. Here I'm just getting more shadows in. Now if I was to work on this more, I definitely want to refine things more, get the values more accurate, the shadows more defined, maybe define some edges, maybe lose some edges a bit more. And I'd also perhaps think more about the composition, because I think in the reference you use, the composition's actually better. There's more space on the right side, and if I were you, I actually would have kept that. To me, it looks better to have that composition more horizontal than how you made it a bit more square. So yeah, not much more to say. I think that's about it. Again, I think you did fine. Your drawing's very good. Your likeness is close. Just pay attention more to values and general shapes, and less to hard edges and details.